processes. How do we tell the difference between living and non-living things? What if the dog and the man were asleep? We would still think they are alive, but how did we know that? We see them breathing and we know that they are alive. What about plants? How do we know that they are alive? They grow over time, so we know that they are alive. In other words, we tend to think of some sort of movement, either growth related or not, as common evidence for being alive. Have you ever wondered about how movements take place and what are the maintenance processes in living organisms? By the end of this chapter, you will be able to understand what are life processes, how nutrition, respiration, transportation, excretion takes place in living organisms. Let us explore them one by one. What are life processes? The maintenance functions of living organisms must go on even when they are not doing anything particular. The processes which together perform this maintenance job are life processes. Since these maintenance processes are needed to prevent damage and breakdown, energy is needed for them. This energy comes from outside the body of the individual organism. So there must be a process to transfer a source of energy from outside the body of the organism, which we call food, to the inside, a process we commonly call nutrition. The outside sources of energy could be quite varied. These sources of energy therefore need to be broken down or built up in the body and must be finally converted to a uniform source of energy that can be used for the various molecular movements needed for maintaining living structures, as well as the kind of molecules the body needs to grow. Oxidizing, reducing reactions are some of the most common chemical means to break down molecules. For this, many organisms use oxygen sourced from outside the body. The process of acquiring oxygen from outside the body and to use it in the process of breakdown of food sources for cellular needs is what we call respiration. In the case of single-celled organism, no specific organs for taking in food, exchange of gases, or removal of waste may be needed because the entire surface of the organism is in contact with the environment. In multicellular organisms, all the cells may not be in direct contact with the surrounding environment. We have seen previously how, in multicellular organisms, various body parts have specialized in the functions they perform. We are familiar with the idea of these specialized tissues and with their organization in the body of the organism. We have seen previously how in multicellular organisms, various body parts have specialized in the functions they perform. We are familiar with the idea of these specialized tissues and with their organization in the body of the organism. The food and oxygen are taken up at one place in the body of the organisms while all parts of the body need them. This situation creates a need for a transportation system for carrying food and oxygen from one place to another in the body. When chemical reactions use the carbon source and the oxygen for energy generation, they create byproducts that are not only useless for the cells of the body but could even be harmful. These waste byproducts are therefore needed to be removed from the body and discarded outside by a process called excretion. Let us consider these various processes essential to maintain life one by one. When we walk or ride a bicycle, we are using up energy. Even when we are not doing any apparent activity, energy is needed to maintain a state of order in our body. How do living things get their food? Some organisms use simple food material obtained from inorganic sources in the form of carbon dioxide and water. These organisms, the autotrophs, include green plants and some bacteria. Other organisms utilize complex substances. These complex substances have to be broken down into simpler ones before they can be used for the upkeep and growth of the body. To achieve this, organisms use biocatalysts called enzymes. Thus, the heterotroph's survival depends directly or indirectly on autotrophs. Autotrophic nutrition. Carbon and energy requirements of the autotrophic organism are fulfilled by photosynthesis. It is the process by which autotrophs take in substances from the outside and convert them into stored forms of energy. Let us now see what actually happens during the process of photosynthesis. The following events occur during this process. 1. Absorption of light energy by chlorophyll. 2. Conversion of light energy to chemical energy and splitting water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. 3. Reduction of carbon dioxide to carbohydrates. These steps need not take place one after the other immediately. For example, desert plants take up carbon dioxide at night and prepare an intermediate which is acted upon by the energy absorbed by the chlorophyll during the day. Let us see how each of the components of the above reaction are necessary for photosynthesis. If you carefully observe a cross-section of a leaf under the microscope, you will notice that some cells contain green dots. These green dots are cell organelles called chloroplasts, which contain chlorophyll. How plant obtains carbon dioxide? Have you heard about stomata? Stomata, which are tiny pores present on the surface of the leaves. Massive amounts of gaseous exchange takes place in the leaves through these pores for the purpose of photosynthesis. Since large amounts of water can also be lost through these stomata, the plant closes these pores when it does not need carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. But it is important to note here that exchange of gases occurs across the surface of stems, roots, and leaves as well. The opening and closing of the pore is a function of the guard cells. The guard cells swell when water flows into them, causing the stomatal pore to open. Similarly, the pore closes if the guard cells shrink. So far, we have talked about how autotrophs meet their energy requirements, but they also need other raw materials for building their body. Water used in photosynthesis is taken up from the soil by the roots in terrestrial plants. Other materials like nitrogen, phosphorus, iron, and magnesium are taken up from the soil. Nitrogen is taken up as organic compounds which have been prepared by bacteria or from atmosphere. Heterotrophic nutrition. Each organism is adapted to its environment. The form of nutrition differs depending on the type and availability of food material as well as how it is obtained by the organism. For example, whether the food source is stationary, such as grass, or mobile, such as a deer, would allow for differences in how the food is accessed and what is the nutritive apparatus used by a cow and a lion. Some organisms break down the food material outside the body and then absorb it. Examples are fungi like bread molds, yeast, and mushrooms. Others take in whole material and break it down inside their bodies. Some other organisms derive nutrition from plants or animals without killing them. This parasitic nutritive strategy is used by a wide variety of organisms like cuscuta, orchids, ticks, and leeches. How do organisms obtain their nutrition? Since the food and the way it is obtained differ, the digestive system is different in various organisms. For example, amoeba takes in food using temporary finger-like extensions of the cell surface which fuse over the food particle, forming a food vacuole. Nutrition in human beings. Do you know what happens to the food once it enters our body? When we eat something we like, our mouth waters. This is actually not only water, but a fluid called saliva secreted by the salivary glands. The saliva contains an enzyme called salivary amylase that breaks down starch, which is a complex molecule, to give sugar. The food is mixed thoroughly with saliva and moved around the mouth while chewing by the muscular tongue. It is necessary to move the food in a regulated manner along the digestive tube so that it can be processed properly in each part. The lining of canal has muscles that contract rhythmically in order to push the food forward. From the mouth, the food is taken to the stomach through the food pipe or esophagus. The muscular walls of the stomach help in mixing the food thoroughly with more digestive juices. These digestion functions are taken care of by the gastric glands present in the wall of the stomach. These release hydrochloric acid, a protein digesting enzyme called pepsin, and mucus. The hydrochloric acid creates an acidic medium which facilitates the action of the enzyme pepsin. The exit of food from the stomach is regulated by a sphincter muscle which releases it in small amounts into the small intestine. From the stomach, the food now enters the small intestine. This is the longest part of the alimentary canal, which is fitted into a compact space because of extensive coiling. The small intestine is the site of complete digestion of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. It receives the secretions of the liver and pancreas for this purpose. The food coming from the stomach is acidic and has to be made alkaline for the pancreatic enzymes to act. Bile juice from the liver accomplishes this in addition to acting on fats. Fats are present in the intestine in the form of large globules, which makes it difficult for enzymes to act on them. Bile salts break down into smaller globules, increasing the efficiency of enzyme action. The pancreas secretes pancreatic juice, which contains enzymes like trypsin for digesting proteins and lipase for breaking down emulsified fats. The walls of the small intestine contain glands which secrete intestinal juice. The enzymes present in it finally convert the proteins to amino acids, complex carbohydrates into glucose, and fats into fatty acids and glycerol. The digested food is taken up by the walls of the intestine. The inner lining of the small intestine has numerous finger-like projections called villi, which increase the surface area for absorption. The unabsorbed food is sent into the large intestine where more villi absorb water from this material. The rest of the material is removed from the body via the anus. The exit of this waste material is regulated by the anal sphincter. Respiration. Diverse organisms do this in different ways. Some use oxygen to break down glucose completely into carbon dioxide and water. Some use other pathways that do not involve oxygen. This process, the first step, takes place in the cytoplasm. In all cases, the first step is the breakdown of glucose, a 6-carbon molecule, into a 3-carbon molecule called pyruvate. Breakdown of pyruvate using oxygen takes place in the mitochondria. This process breaks up the 3-carbon pyruvate molecule to give 3 molecules of carbon dioxide. The other product is water. Since the process takes place in the presence of air, oxygen, it is called aerobic respiration. In other process, the pyruvate may be converted into ethanol and carbon dioxide. This process takes place in yeast during fermentation. Since this process takes place in the absence of air, oxygen, it is called anaerobic respiration. Sometimes when there is a lack of oxygen in our muscle cells, another pathway for the breakdown of pyruvate is taken. Here the pyruvate is converted into lactic acid, which is also a 3-carbon molecule. This buildup of lactic acid in our muscles during sudden activity causes cramps. The energy released during cellular respiration is immediately used to synthesize a molecule called ATP, which is used to fuel all other activities in the cell. In these processes, ATP is broken down, giving rise to a fixed amount of energy which can drive the endothermic reactions taking place in the cell. Why ATP is called as energy currency of the cell? The energy released during the process of respiration is used to make an ATP molecule from ADP and inorganic phosphate. We have seen that plants exchange gases through stomata, and the large intercellular spaces ensure that all cells are in contact with air. Carbon dioxide and oxygen are exchanged by diffusion here. They can go into cells or away from them and out into the air. The direction of diffusion depends upon the environmental conditions and the requirements of the plant. At night, when there is no photosynthesis occurring, CO2 elimination is the major exchange activity going on. During the day, CO2 generated during respiration is used up for photosynthesis, hence there is no CO2 release. Instead, oxygen release is the major event at this time. Animals have evolved different organs for the uptake of oxygen from the environment and for getting rid of the carbon dioxide produced. Terrestrial animals can breathe the oxygen in the atmosphere, but animals that live in water need to use the oxygen dissolved in water. Fishes take in water through their mouths and force it past the gills, where the dissolved oxygen is taken up by blood. In human beings, air is taken into the body through the nostrils. The air passing through the nostrils is filtered by fine hairs that line the passage. The passage is also lined with mucus, which helps in this process. From here, the air passes through the throat and into the lungs. Rings of cartilage are present in the throat. These ensure that air passage does not collapse. Within the lungs, the passage divides into smaller and smaller tubes, which finally terminate in balloon-like structures, which are called alveoli. The alveoli provide a surface where the exchange of gases can take place. The walls of the alveoli contain an extensive network of blood cells. Transportation. Transportation in human beings. Blood is a fluid connective tissue. Blood consists of fluid medium called plasma, in which the cells are suspended. Plasma transports food, carbon dioxide and nitrogenous waste in dissolved form. Oxygen is carried by the red blood cells. We thus need a pumping organ to push blood around the body, a network of tubes to reach all the tissues, and a system in place to ensure that this network can be repaired if damaged. The carbon dioxide-rich blood has to reach the lungs for the carbon dioxide to be removed, and the oxygenated blood from the lungs has to be brought back to the heart. This oxygen-rich blood is then pumped to the rest of the body. We can follow this process step by step. Deoxygenated blood comes from the body to the upper chamber on the right atrium, as it expands. As the right atrium contracts, the corresponding lower chamber, the right ventricle, dilates. This transfers blood to the right ventricle, which in turn pumps it to the lungs for oxygenation. Oxygen-rich blood from the lungs comes to the thin-walled upper chamber of the heart on the left atrium. The left atrium relaxes when it is collecting this blood. It then contracts while next chamber, the left ventricle, expands so that the blood is transferred to it. When the muscular left ventricle contracts in its turn, the blood is pumped out to the body.
Since ventricles have to pump blood into various organs, they have thicker muscular walls than the atria do.
Oxygen enters the blood in the lungs. The separation of the right side and the left side of the heart is useful to keep oxygenated and deoxygenated blood from mixing. Such separation allows a highly efficient supply of oxygen to the body. This is useful in animals that have high energy needs, such as birds and mammals, which constantly use energy to maintain their body temperature. In animals that do not use energy for this purpose, the body temperature depends on the temperature in the environment. Such animals like amphibians or many reptiles have three-chambered hearts and tolerate some mixing of the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood streams. Fishes, on the other hand, have only two chambers to their hearts, and the blood is pumped to the gills, is oxygenated there, and passes directly to the rest of the body. Thus, blood goes only once through the heart in the fish during one cycle of passage through the body. On the other hand, it goes through the heart twice during each cycle in other vertebrates. This is known as double circulation. Blood pressure. The force that blood exerts against the wall of a cell is called blood pressure. The pressure of blood inside the artery during ventricular systole contraction is called systolic pressure, and pressure in artery during ventricular diastole relaxation is called diastolic pressure. The tubes, blood vessels. Arteries are the vessels which carry blood away from the heart to various organs of the body. Since the blood emerges from the heart under high pressure, the arteries have thick elastic walls. Veins collect the blood from different organs and bring it back to the heart. They do not need thick walls because the blood is no longer under pressure. Instead, they have valves that ensure that the blood flows only in one direction. On reaching an organ or tissue, the artery divides into smaller and smaller vessels to bring the blood in contact with all the individual cells. The smallest vessels have walls which are 1 cell thick and are called capillaries. Exchange of material between the blood and the surrounding cells takes place across this thin wall. The capillaries then join together to form veins that convey the blood away from the organ or tissue. Maintenance by platelets. Think about situations when we are injured and start bleeding. Naturally, the loss of blood from the system has to be minimized. To avoid this, the blood has platelet cells which circulate around the body and plug these leaks by helping to clot the blood at these points of injury. Lymph. There is another type of fluid also involved in transportation. This is called lymph or tissue fluid. Through the pores present in the walls of capillaries, some amount of plasma, proteins, and blood cells escape into intercellular spaces in the tissues to form the tissue fluid or lymph. It is similar to the plasma of blood but colorless and contains less protein. Lymph drains into lymphatic capillaries from the intercellular spaces which join to form large lymph vessels that finally open into larger veins. Lymph carries digested and absorbed fat from intestine and drains excess fluid from extracellular space back into the blood.
Transportation in plants. Compared to animals, plants are less complex and require less food and water to survive. A plant takes in water and dissolved nutrients from soil via the roots. The materials to be transported across the plant body are water, minerals, and food. Apart from these nutrients, substances like hormones also have to be transported. Plants have specialized vascular tissues in the plant stem that acts as a route for the water and nutrients to be carried out to various parts of the plants like leaves, flowers, and fruits. Food from various sites is also distributed to the various organs via another tissue of the plant's transport system. The two types of vascular tissues involved in transportation of substances in plants are xylem and phloem. Vascular tissues are tissues that conduct water, minerals, and nutrients throughout the plant body in higher plants. A tissue is a group of cells that perform specialized functions in an organism. Xylem. Xylem tissue is present in roots, stems, and leaves. It has 4 different types of cells: tracheids, vessels, xylem fibers, and xylem parenchyma. The xylem transports water and dissolved minerals from the roots to the leaves. Tracheids. Tracheids and vessels are interconnected to form a continuous system of water-conducting channels that reach all parts of a plant. Vessels. They contain deposits of lignin on their inner walls, which makes them rigid and mechanically strong. Xylem vessels also possess pits. These are small unlignified parts, along with vessels, elements of tracheids that facilitate the movement of water and solutes. The vessels are arranged end to end. The end walls of the vessels are either partially or fully dissolved. This results in the formation of long tubes that carry water. Vessel elements and tracheids are derived from dead cells. Lignin is a complex macromolecule that makes up most of the secondary cell wall in plants. They are hydrophobic and impermeable to water. Thus, they prevent water from migrating out of the xylem when they are lignified. Phloem. Phloem is responsible for transportation of food through a process called translocation. Phloem is composed of sieve tubes, companion cells, phloem parenchyma, and bast fibers. Sieve tubes and companion cells are the conducting elements in phloem. Sieve tubes. They are tubes formed by cells that are joined end to end, separated by perforated cross wall known as sieve plate. Each sieve tube element has degenerate protoplasm, that is, lacks nucleus, vacuole, and most of the organelles, and has a thin cytoplasm that is continuous from one sieve tube element to another through the sieve plates, which helps in the transport of materials. Companion cells. They are smaller cells associated with the sieve tubes. They possess numerous mitochondria which provide source of energy and maintain metabolic activities for sieve tube elements. They have dense cytoplasm and elongated nucleus. It is in contact with the sieve tube cell through pores in the wall. Translocation is the process of transporting food from the leaves, the plant site, for photosynthesis or photomanufacturing. Translocation takes place in the sieve tubes with the help of adjacent companion cells. Transport of water. In xylem tissue, vessels and tracheids of the roots, stems, and leaves are interconnected to form a continuous system of water-conducting channels reaching all parts of the plant. The movement of water and dissolved minerals in xylem is always upwards, that is, from soil to leaves. Transport of water in plants. The cells of root actively take up ions from the soil. This creates a difference in the concentration of these ions between the roots and soil. Inside the root, the concentration of ions is more than the soil. Cell of the root is hypertonic in nature. So, water moves into the root from the soil by osmosis. Water then reaches to the xylem, which results in hydrostatic pressure in the xylem. This pressure is known as root pressure that forces the water up in the plant. However, this pressure is not enough to move water in tall plants. To move water in tall plants, plants use another process known as transpiration pull. According to transpiration pull, water is lost in the form of water vapors through the stomata. Stomata takes water from the deeper cells. Finally, the water is taken from the xylem vessels to the leaf. Transpiration pull can occur only when there is a continuous column of water. The water is in the xylem, which behaves like a solid column because of strong force of attraction between water molecules. This continuity is maintained by the cohesive and adhesive properties of water. Adhesion causes the water molecules to adhere to the xylem walls, and because of cohesion, the water molecules remain together and move up as a stream. The evaporation of water molecules from the cell of the leaf creates a suction which pulls water from the xylem cells of the root. The loss of water in the form of vapor from the aerial parts of the plant is known as transpiration. During the day, when the stomata are open, the transpiration pull becomes the major driving force in the movement of water in the xylem. During night, when stomata are closed, the transport of water is through root pressure. Significance of transpiration. It helps in the absorption and upward movement of water and minerals from roots to the leaves. It also helps in the temperature regulation. It protects the plant from heat injury. Ascent of sap. Plants absorbs water from the soil through the roots. Thus, water has to be transported upwards to the other parts of the plant. This upward movement of water is called ascent of sap. It is called the sap as it contains many dissolved minerals. Ascent of sap involves root pressure and transpiration pull. Transport of food in plants. The mechanism of transport of food in a plant. The movement of food in the phloem takes place by utilizing energy, that is, active transport. The areas where the nutrients are stored known as sink. Example, root. And where they originate as source, that is, leaf. At source, that is, at leaves, food is prepared in the form of glucose. Glucose is converted into sucrose. Sucrose enters into the phloem by active transport, that is, movement of substances at the expense of energy from ATP. The osmotic concentration of phloem will increase as glucose enters into it. Water now enters into sieve tubes by the process of osmosis, due to which the hydrostatic pressure in the phloem tissue rises. This high pressure produced in the phloem tissue allows the movement of food to all parts of the plants having low pressure in their tissues. At sink, that is at root, sucrose move from the phloem into the storage site or growing parts of the plants. Water will also move out from phloem. Hydrostatic pressure will decrease in phloem at sink, that is at root. A pressure gradient is set up in the phloem with high pressure at source and low pressure at sink. So, the phloem sap with food will move from source to the sink. The phloem transports food according to the need of the plant. Example, in spring, even the sugar stored in the roots or stem tissue of a plant would be transported through phloem to the buds, which need energy to grow. Excretory system of humans. The excretory system in human beings includes a pair of kidneys, a pair of ureters, a urinary bladder, and a urethra. This is also known as the urinary system. Kidney. The kidneys are located in the abdomen, one on either side of the backbone. They act as excretory organs and also control the balance of water and mineral ions in the body. Kidneys structure. Each kidney is divided into the outer cortex and the inner medulla. The medulla is composed of conical masses of tissues that led to the pelvis. Pelvis. The central cavity. This cavity is continuous with the ureter, so the urine goes directly to the bladder. The cortex has a random arrangement of tiny tubules called nephrons, which are the functional units of the kidney. Function of kidney. The function of the kidney is not to make urine, it is to maintain homeostasis of the blood, excreting wastes, keeping nutrients, maintaining electrolytes, acid-base balance, and other things. Homeostasis is maintenance of the internal environment of the body. Structure of nephron. A corpuscle is composed of tangled clusters of tiny blood capillaries called glomerulus. This is called the filtration unit. A thin-walled, sac-like structure called Bowman's capsule surrounds the glomerulus. The renal tubule leads away from Bowman's capsule and becomes highly coiled to form the proximal convoluted tubule. The tubule makes a hairpin loop called the loop of Henle and joins the distal convoluted tubule. The distal convoluted tubule opens into a collecting duct which passes into the renal medulla. From each kidney, a ureter arises and opens into the urinary bladder. The urethra carries urine to the outside of the body. The urethra emerges through the penis in males and close to the vagina in females. Excretory pathway in kidney. Blood carried by the renal artery to the nephron, to the renal pyramid, to the pelvis, to the ureter, to the urinary bladder, to the urethra, to outside. Excretion in plants. Plants have no special organs for removal of wastes. The waste products of respiration and photosynthesis are used as raw materials for each other. Oxygen gas produced as a byproduct of photosynthesis is used up during respiration, and carbon dioxide produced during respiration is used up during photosynthesis. Excretion is carried out in the plants in the following ways. Number 1. The gaseous wastes, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and water vapors are removed through stomata of leaves and lenticels of stems. Number 2. Many waste products are stored in vacuoles of the cells. Plant cells have comparatively large vacuoles. Number 3. Some waste products are stored in the leaves. They are removed as the leaves fall off. Number 4. Some waste products such as resins and gums are stored spatially in non-functional old xylem. Number 5. Some waste products such as tannins, resins, gums are stored in the bark as solid bodies as they are rendered harmless and thereby removed as peeled off. Number 6. Plants excrete some waste products through roots into the soil around them. Number 7. Plants also get rid of excess water through transpiration.